Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 259. A very special guest on today's episode of Stand Up. He is a guy I've known for over 20 years. He has a PhD, and he is now a professor at University of Nevada, Reno School of Journalism. Dr. Myrton Runningwolf joins me for the first time on the podcast. I am Pete Dominick. Time to stand up with me right now. Yeah, we are off, and I'm very happy to have you joining me for what I will call a very special episode. It is Taint Week, and I'm taking it a little easy this week, not doing all the extras here on the podcast that I produce daily. So usually there are news segments here at the top, and it's just going to be probably one guest a day this week. But thanks to Chris Metka, who just upped his subscription to this podcast, which is independent media, fully supported by you, the subscriber, because I was working this week and bringing you new content every day that we can learn and grow from together. That's the point of the show, and I wanted to give you something each day this week, but I'll get back at it, all the extra news segments for next week, so that this daily podcast is something that I know many of you have grown to depend on to get that news update, those news updates every day, and we'll get back to it. But this is my kind of trying to relax a little bit this week, and I hope you're enjoying it. A lot of feedback on yesterday's episode with anthropologist Dr. Richard Grinker, and I think you're going to love my conversation with Dr. Myrton Runningwolf today for a number of reasons. But if you know me or care about me even a little bit, then you're going to like it, because Myrton Runningwolf is an old friend of mine, my roommate from my second year of acting school. So for that reason alone, and our reminiscing and the story he tells at the beginning of our conversation, it's worth listening to. But he's also a full-blood Native American and someone I've grown to learn a lot from. Well, I've always learned a lot from. I've always been curious about and interested in tribal people because I grew up just outside Syracuse, New York, right next door to the Onondaga Indian Reservation, and I also grew up playing a sport invented by Native Americans called lacrosse. I even have an authentic stick made for me by an Iroquois national, and so I always took an interest in Native American culture as a result of where I lived and as a result of the sport of lacrosse. But then became more curious and passionate about it when I learned more about the poverty, the addiction, the violence that is much of as a result of the way that these people have been treated for the last several generations in this country. And I've learned a lot more about tribal youth and worked with tribal youth for the past several years through the Fish and Wildlife Agency and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And my friend Steve Chase, who has helped me come in and talk to these young folks about media and government and politics and comedy. And so I've grown more and more curious and more passionate about tribal folks in this country and finding racial justice for them and create an opportunity and trying to help and understand what is going on the reservations and in indigenous communities in this country, and trying to learn more about it and what, if anything, we can do to help improve the situation on the reservations and within tribal communities, especially during this time where they have been hit really hard by COVID. And Dr. Myrton Runningwolf has had just a fantastic, fascinating, very original career since we met in the late 90s at the American Musical and Dramatic Academy. He went on to star in soap operas and television and film. He's in a Brad Pitt movie. He worked with a lot of great directors and filmmakers and became a successful filmmaker himself, and now is a professor where he has so many degrees. He's got a PhD from Stanford, a master's degree from NYU's School of Arts, a master's for fine arts from the University of Southern California's School of Cinematic Arts. And he does a lot of research and work on increasing the inclusion of marginalized populations in mainstream media production. And his writing has appeared in all kinds of very respectable places, including Hollywood Reporter, MSNBC, Variety, as well as a number of other academic publications regarding Native Americans. So he's had so many different jobs, so many different experiences. He's a very unique, hardworking, thought-provoking guy. I love him to death, and I'm very excited to introduce him and his work and the important questions I'm asking him, and also would love to have him join one of our Zoom hangouts as well. Speaking of which, tomorrow night, that's New Year's Eve. What time should we start? Probably 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 10 o'clock. Let's say 10 o'clock right now. I'll put the link in today's Patreon. For those of you who are paid subscribers, we'll have a New Year's Eve party. If you're not, sign up now. Go to patreon.com/PDominic. You can get that link and join us every Thursday at 8 and this Thursday at 10 p.m. for a New Year's Eve virtual party. Also, if you haven't donated to GiveWell, just a couple days left in 2020, and now is the time to give your donation to givewell.org/standup. It's an amazing organization that does all kinds of important research to help find out what charities, what organizations will make your dollar go the furthest and save the most lives and do the most good. GiveWell.org/standup. And now here's my conversation with Dr. Myrton Runningwolf, who starts with a memory of us living together in an apartment in New York City in the late 90s. And when he came home, and, well, I'll let him take it from there.
Well, you and I were roommates, which I loved. I loved all of it. And you, me, and our dear friend Justin, otherwise known as Two Forks. I don't even know if you remember that joke that you came up with, that Justin, a husky gentleman, and we just gave him crap. Yeah, mostly you gave him crap about his huskiness.
Well, I gave everybody
and
crap.
Because of being Native American and having the last name Runningwolf, you came up with Indian names for it.
I thought we all needed. I thought we all deserved to have them, even though we were whites.
We have earned them, yes. And so you called him Two Forks.
I felt like, living with you, we desired them. They weren't official or anything, and they had to be, based on your life, some component. And he was Two Forks because he ate a lot, and I don't recall what I was.
I don't remember. I just remember falling out of my seat, laughing when you said Two Forks, because it was very reminiscent of the idea of when I came home and the shock of seeing you naked in our living room. Doing calisthenics. And I just remember the story that I remember the most, or the sight that I remember the most, and it's kind of seared into my memory, was your naked person sprinting at me and telling me to get onto the floor, onto my knees. And I was like, I just kind of went with it. And so that's exactly what I did. I dropped onto the floor, onto my knees. And then you said, quickly crawl into the bedroom.
Yes.
Which I did.
Yes.
And then our loving roommate, Justin, Two Forks, was already there, looking out the window.
Yeah.
And to my great relief, you did not follow me into the bedroom.
Not this time.
Instead, I crawled over to where Justin was, wondering what was going on. And he's looking out the window. And I hear you say, I'm doing squat thrusts now, or something along those lines, something along the lines of a lunge or a squat thrust. And I look out the window and there's a lady across the way in New York City, looking as she's having a glass of wine, looking into our apartment window, which is completely open. And you, I guess, in a fit of inspiration, Justin had noticed her looking into our apartment, maybe 10, 15 minutes before I got home. And he said, hey, Pete, I think that lady is looking at us through her window.
That's right.
And he turned around, and less than, a second later, you were completely naked.
That's right.
Doing calisthenics, jumping jacks and whatnot in our living room.
Yeah, because I am allowed to do whatever I want in my room. And he had, little background is he says he had seen this woman kind of looking across the way at us before. I'd never noticed it. But either way, I decided I was going to give her a show. Yeah, man. She deserved a show. A show it was. Yeah. And I heard things like, the image is more vivid in my memory, but I remember hearing things like, I'm putting lotion on now. Yes, I narrated what I was doing for the two of you. And I was naked and I applied a lotion. I did jumping jacks and squat thrusts. And she watched for a while. And then finally she pulled, I pointed at her. And I screamed, nice. I see you. And she pulled her shade down in shame. And we never saw or heard from her again. But yeah, and I like to think that is our performance background. So for those of you that are unfamiliar, Pete and I got together because we attended the American Musical and Dramatic Academy in New York City, and we studied performing arts. And I think that probably goes down in the annals of one of the greatest performance art pieces in New York City history. Sure. It was probably the most entertaining I'd ever been to anybody. You've seen my act.
Which says a lot, which says a whole lot of
I should do, if
landed.
there were more work in that field, which was, I guess, a form of catching someone as a voyeur, entertaining them for that, I would take the work. Listen, I think it's a healthy way of expressing yourself.
Right. We are diversifying our economy and our skill
Who's
set.
losing?
So.
Who's losing? Well,
right. Yeah.
So here's where I wanted to start with this. Like, basically, we met because we were both students at the American Musical and Dramatic Academy, but we were in very different parts of our life in terms of you had already had a lot of schooling, secondary education, college. You'd already played college football. You had already, I had 2 years of college, and I don't know what the age difference was for us, but it did seem like about a decade. And by what I mean by that is I was spending time with and living with a person who was in a different station in his life. He took care of himself. He was motivated. He worked hard. And I was more of a young 20-year-old kid trying to find his way as a stand-up comedian in New York City. Right. And, in the meantime, you were making meals and getting a job and exercising and networking and just being more mature. That's how I remember a lot of things. And I think that you allowed me to hang out with you because I entertained you. You enjoyed me as a person, but, it was more of like a little yappy barking dog sidekick because you were so much more mature and kind of advanced than I was. And I think I learned a lot from you just watching you behave. But there was this, in my mind, there was a distinct disparity in maturity between us.
Mm. Mm. I apologize for the sweat. I just finished working out. It's not that I'm flummoxed by our past story.
I didn't even notice. But when have you not just finished working out? It's always been a half an hour since you last exercised, is my recollection.
Right. And eating. Well, I think that one of the things that you're being modest, and not to turn this into just giving compliments back and forth because, we can, rib each other. But I also do remember you being somebody who dedicated every single weeknight night to going out to the comedy clubs. And I found that incredibly inspiring. That work ethic that you had. And we talked about Dave Chappelle, which I hope we get a chance to talk about some of the stuff that he's been, mentioning lately. But I remember you and I had a conversation and I didn't remember his name at the time. And I said, dude, there's this guy that I watched on a Sunday morning show and he's going out to Central Park. And he's got a milk crate and he just puts the milk crate down in the middle of the park and asks people if they want to have a comedy show. And that's what he would do. He would just do that. I guess he's still doing things like that. But your work ethic reminded me of that because I remember having that conversation that you were out there, you were grinding, man. And in terms of I worked out and everything else and stuff like that. But in terms of the maturity level and in terms of you kind of inspiring each other, that work ethic was something that I think that, at that time when we were both trying to go out there and figure out how. Yeah,
we shared that. We definitely shared a work ethic, I really appreciate you saying that. It makes me feel good to hear that and to know that was something that you recall and I impressed upon you. But another separate kind of yet related, I was thinking about this, and when we spoke a couple weeks ago, I thought about that as well. And we were talking about drugs and alcoholism in our lives and your life specifically. And I wonder if you remember, at that point, I still hadn't, I don't think, had a drink, and you didn't drink at all either.
You're right. Yeah.
And I wonder if that, I think about that a lot because now I drink a lot and smoke a lot of weed and I'm older and everything. But, I don't think I abuse anything. I think I'm mature about it and everything. But I think that's the whole idea is to be able to understand what it does and be moderate and be healthy. But did that? Why didn't
that's
you?
one of the things.
Why didn't we?
A lot of the people who party
young
that I've been around, whether it's New York or Los Angeles, Chicago, quite honestly, they were losers. I got to be honest. I would see people going out, and I would be like, "Yo, I really want to do that." And I think it was the same thing with being an athlete. I would be working out, literally sneaking into the weight room, trying to get ready to play college football on Friday and Saturday nights. And I stole the key and I had it made. I had a copy of the key. And luckily, when the police officers busted me for sneaking into the school weight room, the key wasn't an exact duplicate. It was like a duplicate of a duplicate of a duplicate. So it didn't work. You had to work at it to make it work and everything else and stuff like that. And so I did. I got busted by the police officers for my Friday nights were spent working out. Saturday nights were spent working out. I was able to go on and get a college scholarship because of things like that. And the guys who went out and got drunk and everything else, the cool guys, they didn't.
Right.
And I think the same thing happened with a lot of, our classmates and everything else and stuff like that. They had a great time. They had a good time. I don't know any of them that had a decade plus of a show that are now on, that have been on CNN, that have done, in my case, movies with Brad Pitt and David Fincher, those things.
Right.
So I don't look back on that as being, time misspent or wasted.
I'm so glad that you see it that way. That's how I always saw it then. That's how I see it now. There was no role for that even kind of socializing in my life, or much certainly not drugs and alcohol being, at the center of any socialization. I mean,
right.
And so and you're right about us, and so the role that it plays. But let me introduce people to you. We could reminisce and talk about our past as it overlaps, but I really want to talk more about you, because you've always been one of the most interesting people in my life. And I've been thinking about you a lot, because I really wanted to interview you and share your story with everybody. And what I remember is when I got a talk show, you were like my second guest of all time in the history of my talk show. It was a 9/11 conspiracy theorist who intrigued me, and who I even believed some of his bullshit at that point. And he's a very nice man. And he was like, please, I'm not going to do this if you're abusive to me. And I was like, no, I really think some of the shit you're saying. And then you. And then I realized the direction I wanted to go was more you and less conspiracy. And I never believed in, and I still don't, in any conspiracies. And I think they're the problem with all of our country and society. But you were one of my first guests, because you were one of the most interesting people. And I've always had a strong interest in kind of indigenous history and peoples, and especially in the United States of America. And you were always that way. You were always so unique. You never fit in anywhere, and you did your own thing. And this is probably somehow pejorative or racist. You went by the beat of your own drum. Isn't there an Indian thing there? Isn't there some kind of a... So, and let me just start by asking you, Indian, native people, tribal people, indigenous, are they all used interchangeably, or any of them pejorative? A lot of people think Indian is now politically incorrect and divisive or pejorative, but I hear people using it all the time, and so I'm confused. What is your take?
I think that mostly old white people use Indian when they're referring to indigenous people of North America. There are Indians, though, like, now in our travels around the world and around the nation and stuff, we know that there are Indians, Indian Americans, that actually come from the continent of India. And they're very proud of that. And I've worked with many, and they're like, we are Indians, you're not. And I'm like, I'm not the one arguing. So I appreciate when it is Blackfeet, when people take the time and the effort to actually understand my tribe, my tribal affiliation, or my tribal enrollment or membership, Blackfeet. But I'm also Wasco from Oregon. So Blackfeet from Montana and Wasco from Oregon. But in terms of like Native Americans, some people have a problem with America, and they don't like American Indian or Native American. And so they want to go with indigenous. I think the problem with indigenous for me, though, is most races are indigenous to somewhere. So it becomes this almost like generic term that doesn't have any specificity at all. But the other thing is that being Native American, as opposed to, say, people who are indigenous to South America or Central America or First Nations Canadian, nobody else is fighting the world's last remaining superpower in terms of economics, politics, and all the other stuff that goes with it. And we don't have a whole lot of allies in terms of indigenous identity and struggles that are willing to stand up to the United States of America. So, our lack of representation in Congress, are, being steamrolled with things like the pipeline issues and stuff like that. We don't have a lot of allies that are just like, yeah, we'll go toe to toe with you. We'll stand right beside you as you go to war with the United States of America. So I think that when we, kind of like go down this path, and I get why people would say indigenous, and, I don't turn it into a huge issue. Whatever people can say, whatever they want to say. But it misses the mark on some of the more, important political and economic struggles.
Redskins.
Redskins, yeah, that is just straight out racist. But is there any
debate on that? Is there any debate on that within the community?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think that for a lot of people, there's and this goes to the Cleveland Indians changing their mascot recently.
I was going to ask you about that.
A lot of people are saying that well, these are at least some form of visibility, some like tip of the hat to inclusion of Native American. Of course, there's, this kind of like BS, idea. Well, this is an honoring gesture, which it's not. But the idea, that there are many Native Americans that say, okay, we'd rather have a stereotypical caricature as some form of visibility or inclusion than nothing, than complete erasure. And I get that. I'm just like, but the stereotypes and the caricatures are dehumanizing. They don't talk about anything of significance. They don't, have us kind of reconcile what happened in the past and all the different tragedies and everything else and stuff. And especially when you have somebody as arrogant as Dan Snyder of the Washington Redskins who says, put it in all caps, I will never change, the name. That's an exhibition of again, economic and political power. And he says, I don't have to listen to you because you don't matter.
Yeah, he is a real bastard. And enough about him. But yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up, that comment that he made. I feel like were you always kind of like aware of racism and did you kind of call it out and for what it was, even when I first met you? Because I feel like you were. I feel like you taught me about that in a unique way, but I don't remember. I feel like you didn't really suffer fools at all.
Part of my education, though, was wrestling with what was going on kind of blatantly in my face. So some of our classmates and some of our instructors at the American Musical and Dramatic Academy, I remember one time I was hanging out with some of our classmates and there was, his name is slipping me.
Describe him and I'll nail it.
Farrakhan. Sorry. Minister Farrakhan was on
he
television.
Was a classmate of ours?
No, he was not.
No, I thought you were talking about a classmate. Like, who is it? Yeah. Was it John Moreno? You're like, no. Okay, yes, I'm sorry. Louis Farrakhan. Go ahead.
I would name some of the people, but I think that they would be upset with me. I do remember some of the people that were in the group.
John was a good guy. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say he was bad. Yeah, go ahead.
So we were watching a television program where Louis Farrakhan was speaking. And I was the only person of color in the room. And all of these Caucasian people started bad-mouthing Louis Farrakhan. But Louis Farrakhan was not saying anything during that particular interview that was insightful, kind of like, hate speech or anything else and stuff like that. He was advocating for kind of like the rights of Black people. And I got kind of upset. And the person that I was dating at the time was just like, what the hell is your problem? And I walked out and was just like, because here's somebody that is actually speaking for people of color who have historically had a hard go of it. And for the room full of Caucasian people to respond because it was fun, because it was popular, because everybody else was going along with it, I thought was incredibly wrong. And I was just like, don't you see this? And the person that I was dating was just like, no, I see that you're overreacting. And I was like, oh shit. And it did remind me of, our instructor, Randolph Pearson. I don't even know if the guy is still alive or not. But on our first day there, in class, he pointed at me and he said, we should do One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Because being a football player, being 6'5", at that time I was about 240, 250 pounds. He was like, and I was just like, dude, I didn't travel all the way across the country to come to this school, pay all this money to go to this school so that I could be your silent Indian stereotype that stands in the corner. But he was just like, oh, I'm doing you a great favor, though. And I'm like, thank you? Question mark?
Yeah.
What the hell?
Well, it should be mentioned
I'm not here to do.
For people listening, and I actually think this is important, probably relevant to your life experience. You are a big guy. You're 6'3", and you're full-blooded Native American, and one can't miss you in any room you've been in. And so my next question is, how have you mostly been in rooms with white people, and don't you stick out in a way that most people of color, even if they were the only one, don't? You're such a unique guy because of your size, and you're in great shape. You look like a big superhero, and you always have, and you always have been intimidating as a result. And yet you're this kind, thoughtful man. Though at least you used to get angry, and it would be terrifying. And I was always glad that I was friends with you and tried to never make you angry. But I mean, I don't think that that's probably not been a feature of you in your professional career. But I mean, it would be easy to be intimidated by you is what I'm saying for people. And you're probably always the only in your entire life 6'3" Native American looking person with the last name Running Wolf. I mean, what is that? What has that been like?
It's a challenge. I think that, for me, and we talked about like drugs and alcohol. One of the problems I think about a lot of people talking about what's happening with Native America right now is there's a lot of, kind of self-identified Native American scholars who say that if we talk about some of the social ills that are happening on our reservation, they call that poverty porn, which really pisses me off. I'm just like, whoa, wait a second. But we are looking at people who are self-identified. So, Elizabeth Warren-esque, Johnny Depp-esque, Taylor Lautner-esque, people that are claiming this identity so that it gives them some clout, it gives them some prestige to go ahead and, build their social media following or whatever it is.
Hilaria Baldwin.
These things. There you go.
No,
exactly.
That was Spanish, but same thing.
It's Spanish, but the same idea, right? So it's
Can we just talk about her the rest of the time? Sorry, go ahead.
No, but it's that idea of like taking on this exotic identity for self-promotion, right?
Yep.
And one of the things that they get tripped up with oftentimes is that they don't know what actual reservation life is like. And me growing up with poverty, drug addiction, domestic violence, drug trafficking, gang violence, and stuff like that, to survive that world. Yeah, man. I had to like, it's one of those things where, the best defense is to attack. The best defense is to show that you're the toughest person out there. So that's what I grew up with, knowing before I went to New York City and tried to like work with a bunch of like very delicate, frail theater kids. And so, yeah, I would actually speak out, and also being an athlete. And one of my teammates was Terry Crews.
No
Terry Crews.
Way. I did not know that.
Yeah. And I think that, when he went through his kind of like Me Too moment and everything else, I remember he was before Congress, and they asked him when the agent grabbed his genitals, why didn't you just punch him out? And Terry Crews said something, I'm paraphrasing. He said something about like, as a black man, as a man of color, the people that I grew up with are either in jail or dead. And that to me was a lot of the people that I graduated high school with. They're either in jail or they're dead. And I understood that. And he's like, so I can't react that way. I cannot go over to somebody, a powerful Caucasian person or just a Caucasian person, and lay into them, grab my genitals in front of my wife or not. I don't get to have that. I get very few chances and opportunities to actually have a life outside of that, which I grew up with. And so for me, that was the same thing. Is like, I don't get a lot of opportunities to actually walk amongst the whites in a way that actually allows and makes it understandable for me to come and talk about the things that I've been through. And for a lot of the self-identified Native American people that are, sucking up a lot of the air, they don't want to have anything to do with it either. They don't like that I speak this way.
What have you been through, Myrt? We talked about this for a while the other day, and it was really, I think, dramatic because I never knew most of this stuff. Your mom recently passed away, and we talked a lot about her and your childhood. We'd never gotten into it before. I knew things. I knew that you weren't raised in a mansion by a traditional family. I knew where you came from to a certain extent. And to be fair, I think you wore a lot of those scars on your sleeve. On your surface, you could tell that this guy hadn't had a charmed life, but that, you weren't maybe at that point willing to, or even ready to discuss it. Who knows? But it seems like now you've got a PhD and 17 master's degrees and quite a career. And you've been introspective and looked at, I think, your childhood and the man that you become. And what would you share with the public now about what you went through? Yeah.
Well, I think that, one of the most horrible stories is that, well, there are a bunch of stories and everything else, but I remember once when I was a kid, 8 or 9 years old, and there was a house party at my mom's house. And there's just a bunch of drunk people, as there often were, drunk party people downstairs. We lived in the bedrooms were upstairs. And I was asleep, trying to sleep. I kind of got used to like, having parties and, loud music and everything else downstairs. And I woke up one night and this dude, total stranger in our house that was part of my mom's partying, gang or whatever else, he grabbed me and threw me on the floor and took out a knife and stuck it to my throat and was holding me down. And like, he cracked open the bedroom door, like just a little tiny bit, maybe like 3 or 4 inches, and held me there. And he's like, "Are they fucking coming?" And I apologize again. I'm trying not to be profane, but he was like, "They fucking coming? Are they fucking coming?" And I'm like, I'm just awake. And I'm just like, and I'm looking out the hallway and it's the hallway. There's nobody there. And we're up on the second floor. So nobody can hear. Dude has a knife to my throat. And he's just like, "Are they there?" And I can smell the beer. I can smell the weed. And I can tell that this dude is just like way gone. And I'm just like, what the hell am I going to do? And I'm like looking. And I thought literally for a few moments, I thought, is there somebody coming in? Are they attacking? What's going on and everything else and stuff. And after, 30 seconds, 45 seconds or so, I realized this dude is just tripping, but he's got a knife to my throat. And I'm like, oh, what do I do? What do I do? And I'm looking out in the hallway and I'm like, no, they're not here. They're not here. They're not coming. He's like, "Don't fucking lie to me, man. Don't fucking lie to me." And he's got the knife to my throat. And he's like, "I'll fucking kill you right now. I'll fucking kill you right now." I was just like, okay. And I'm just like, no. He's like, "If you say a fucking word, I'm going to kill you." And I was just like, "All right, man. All right." And he's like, "You better tell me. Don't lie to me if they're going to be coming up the stairs or not." And I was like, "All right, man. All right." And dude, man, laid on top of me, his full weight with a knife to my throat. I would say like for at least a half an hour. Jesus, and just tripping. Right. And I'm just sitting there telling him the whole time, nobody's coming, nothing, trying to like talk him down. And then he must have passed out at some point. And got the knife to my throat, still on top of me and everything else and stuff. And I kind of like started to shake and move to see if like I woke him up or if he would say anything. And then maybe after like an hour or so dude's been on me this whole time, I managed to work out my way out from underneath him. And I was going to go downstairs and tell my mom, everybody what was going on and stuff. Like there's a strange dude up there. But what I realized at that time, and what never gets talked about in these, self-identified Native scholars will never like want to come to terms with, I couldn't say anything. I couldn't say anything to that house full of partiers because I would have been the person that was ruining the party. As an 8 or 9 year old kid, they'd have been like, kid, and they would have laughed at me. I would have gotten in trouble with my mom because she would have been upset that I was like getting one of her friends in trouble or trying to like blow the whistle on one of her friends. So I knew I couldn't do anything. So dude is passed out on the floor. I'm standing there. I can't leave. I can't go downstairs and tell anybody. I'm in my pajamas. So I crawled back asleep. I went back into my bed and pulled the covers back up, and, tried to go back to sleep. Couldn't sleep for a long time. Then finally, after a while, just fell asleep, totally like in this place of like, I've got to be ready to be, to jump up and everything else and stuff in case this dude gets back up. Fell asleep. Remember, I woke up in the morning and he was gone. At some point during the night, he must have like staggered to his feet with his knife and everything else and just left. And so those are the kinds of things, and like other incidents happened between me and my brother, literally where my brother tried to like blow out he was jealous and had animosity because I earned a college football scholarship. And there was nobody in my house or in my community that was like, good for you, working hard and applying yourself. Like, no, I was the guy that like ruined the party because I didn't want to be partying, kind of like we talked about with our friends that partied and stuff. Like, yeah. I was just like, nah, I'm going to go try to do something better with my life. And that pissed him off. And my brother, he was just like, I remember, it was a New Year's celebration. He got all drunk and everything else and stuff. And he started to charge me. And he was, I was like close to 300 pounds at the time playing college football. And he was maybe like $180. And he was going for my knees. He was Jesus. Like, fuck you. I'm going to like blow out your knees. I'm going to take your college career. And then later when I was working at I worked for the CW, for an affiliate station for the CW. Dude, man, came to where I was living, snuck in and stole all the stuff I needed for work because he had this animosity and this jealousy and this hatred that was fueled by not only all this stuff that he was going through, but, decades, years and years of drug abuse and alcoholism and an entire environment, community that kind of like did that. And and I remember I called him up. I was like, hey man, did you steal that stuff? And he was like, yeah, man. Yeah. And there's that kind of like belligerent, drunk high. Yeah. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? Mm. And when my mom passed away, and I brought this stuff back up, hey man, because he was asking me for money, and he was just like, hey man, hook me up with some money and everything. And I had just given him and my nephew $1,500 and paid their rent. And 4 days later, he was like, hey man, can you hook me up with, some more money? And I was like, what'd you do with the $1,500, man? And he's like, oh, I just bought a little bit of weed. I was like, no. And he's like, what about family, man? What about family? And I was just like, dude, what about like wanting to blow my knees out when I had my football scholarship? What about trying to like sabotage my career working for the CW? And he was quiet for a second. He said, yeah, well, I can still kick your ass, man.
Oh God.
And this is like days after my mom passed away, like days, like, I like when she passed away, because they would hit her up. Like she was basically their ATM, they're not employed, they kind of like, do whatever they can to survive and stuff like that. And so, once a week, twice a week or something like that, they would go to my mom's house and hit her up, cuss her out, get drunk, intimidate her, and she'd end up giving them $20, $40, whatever, a couple 20s and stuff like that. And they would do that all the time. And my sister does that stuff all the time. And a lot of people do that. But when she passed away, they didn't have that. And they tried to turn me into their ATM.
Yeah.
And I was like, nah, man, but again, Kevin Costner doesn't talk about this stuff. Dances with Wolves doesn't look at this stuff. Leonardo DiCaprio and The Revenant, nobody wants to talk about this kind of stuff. But, I put this stuff into my work, and it summarily gets dismissed by places like Sundance Film Festival and Disney and all that stuff.
So what do you think, like, how do we talk about tribal people and their role? I mean, this is basically where your PhD lies, and what you are writing and talking and creating about. Something I've learned a lot about over the past several years, working with tribal youth through an amazing program through the BIA, the federal government Bureau of awesome. Indian Affairs, and but it's hard because there's just so little representation, and part of why there's so little representation is there's really not many of you. And there's so little power. Yet there's so many stories to be told, and you've tried to tell them throughout your career. And your frustration seems to lie in them not being resourced. Not, no one's going to be interested in that. We're not going to fund that project. We're not going to, because yet there are so many stories that are being told about Native Americans, but through the lens of white people forever in this country. Right. So where is the disconnect? Do you think in culture in 2020 in America today? I mean, because it would seem, my impression is that tribal people in this country are as worse off as they have ever been when it comes to poverty, addiction, and mental health issues. And what I've heard from these young people, one after another in the several years that I've attended this conference, are just, I don't have to tell you, but a constant litany of almost horrifically stereotypical nightmares that deal with violence and addiction and everything that poverty, I think, tends to breed, and especially in marginalized communities. No community is more marginalized than yours. And I wonder if there's any light at the end of the tunnel, if anything's changing. And you've worked so hard to tell the stories to help the vast majority of Americans understand what's happening, so that we can do something, at least be aware. What's the situation? What's the status of your people and their stories being told? Is that I'm trying to get to a good question here. Sorry. Yeah.
No. I thank you for asking the question, because I think that there's a lot of research that goes into it, right? But you kind of have to like parse through it and everything else and stuff. But basically, UCLA has done kind of like and yearly does this large kind of like examination of the demographics of what's happening with mainstream media production, film and television. USC does something similar. Columbia University in New York City does something similar. GLAAD does something similar. And when you look at those numbers, it's horrible. It's horrible. The representation of Native Americans is, right now in this kind of like era of equity, diversity, and inclusion, everybody's like, oh, we're making ground. But if you look at the category for Native America, they're just completely gone. Like nobody wants to actually recognize that. And you saw on CNN that when it came to looking at the poll results for the election, the presidential election, there was Latino, African American, Asian American, and something else. So that became a meme in Native American country, and it still happens. It's like Native America is no longer even a demographic that is measurable in its participation in so many different ways. And so we have to start making up for that. And how do you actually do that when people are just like, you all don't give a damn about us. You don't care. And just like Dan Snyder says, and we don't have to care. You can tell us straight to our face what your concerns are, and we don't have to listen to you. And again, this goes to that superpower thing that, New Zealand, the First Nations, Aboriginal Australians, they don't have to deal with this. We can tell people straight to their face, this is the problem. And actually, I was at a Hollywood studio, and I signed an NDA, so I can't name it. But I was at a Hollywood studio, and I said,
Warner Brothers,
they're Paramount. I can't tell you.
Prudential.
And they were
Geico.
They were kind of defending their stuff. And I had looked at the data, and I was just like, yeah, you're making this up. It's not real. And they said, well, who are you? And I said, I'm Dr. Myrton Runningwolf. I have my PhD from Stanford University. I have a master's from USC, another master's from NYU. And Dude Man says, the guy that ran the program, this diversity program for the studio, said, don't wave your resume in our face. And that's the jam. That's the deal. It's the same stance that Dan Snyder takes, where it's like, oh, you're right here, right in front of us, telling us that there's a problem, and we don't have to listen to you. Okay, cool, man. And so I think that that's a lot of what the kids are dealing with, is they're like, so, not anything to call out, where I'm working right now. I work at the University of Nevada, Reno, but last fall, out of a class of about 4,000, we only had 18 Native American students. If that were equal with the demographics, we should have about 100 Native American students coming in every fall, new students to the entire university. This year, we had 3. Only 3.
Why? What is happening in Native American communities that is not producing ambition or opportunity? Because the way I see it, it's so bad that surviving the day, the week, the year is really all you're thinking about. And I hear this a lot in impoverished, like Black communities as well, when it comes to drugs and incarceration. It's like just trying to get through the day. The idea of planning for your future is silly, because you don't think you're going to make it to 18 without going to jail or whatever, overdosing, on drugs and so on. So I mean, how do you? And I'm sure there's no one answer, and I'm sure we could talk about this for hours, but how do you see these problems, specifically as it relates to why there isn't more, I'm going to just assume applicants. Like, it's not like there's a bunch of applicants and you're turning away. That I'm guessing that you would take, as many that applied because you want to provide that opportunity and create that distinction and diversity on your campus.
Right. And I think that you hit the nail right on the head, which is they don't want to go to college. And the question is like, well, and here's where my solution is, which is, again, kind of like a work ethic solution, which is, well, then you got to go ask them why. And then you got to go and make the investment of time and effort to listen to the answers. And nobody wants to do that. They're like, well, we'll hold a powwow, or we'll, Tom Hanks has News of the World, that new movie that came out, right? Which just completely obliterates all the Native American presence. It's about a Caucasian man rescuing a Caucasian, I think she's like 10 years old in the movie or whatever else, from the clutches of the Kiowa. But you never see the Native Americans at all. And actually, the story is an appropriation of the violence that Native America went through. And then they also talk about the American Indian boarding schools, and they call them the agency schools, and the forced assimilation. And oh no, there's this poor white girl, little 10-year-old white girl, who's being stripped of her home, which she calls the Kiowa. But you're erasing Native American presence. You're like, okay, well, wait a second. The only reason anybody's going to come watch this is because Tom Hanks is going to be saving a little white girl who has been assimilated into a Kiowa thing. So that's more of a tragedy than talking about what happened with the Carlisle Indian School or any of the other boarding schools that happened during that era. So this becomes marketable. So the erasure and the disappearance of Native America is something that our society wants. We would rather have that.
5 years after the Civil War, Captain Jefferson Kyle Kidd crosses paths with a 10-year-old girl taken by the Kiowa people, forced to return to her aunt and uncle. Kidd agrees to escort the child across the harsh and unforgiving plains of Texas. However, the long journey soon turns into a fight for survival as the traveling companions encounter danger at every... Have you... I feel like you could reach out.
I saw it, yeah. I went and saw it.
I mean, Tom Hanks should know better than to...
Yeah, and there are a lot of people should know better. Johnny Depp, who kind of like made this weird claim that his grandmother, on some talk show was Cherokee Indian. He should know better. A lot of the people should know better. David E. Kelly, who's got a show on right now on ABC television called Big Sky, which is set on and near my reservation, the Blackfeet Nation in Montana. And there's a lot of groups, and the storyline basically is missing and murdered women. Well, that storyline actually is, again, an appropriation of what's happening on our tribal communities right now. The missing and murdered Indigenous woman problem is this huge national story.
Yes.
And David Kelly, when approached, because he's also a lawyer and producer, he's been doing this for a while, the only real comment that he gave back to the people who were asking him to actually use that show to address what's going on with our tribal nations said, in a very smug way, he said, well, make sure you spell my name right when you complain, or something along those lines.
Dick.
Because he spells it Kelley. And I think that when they wrote him the letter asking him to recognize what's going on, they spelled it Kelly. They forgot the second E. And so in a very smug way, in a very Dan Snyder-esque way, he was just like, I'm not doing anything. I'm not, and so this erasure,
by the way, that David Kelly, that second E in his last name, he actually stole that from the Navajo.
Did he really?
The E. He went onto the res and he saw it and he took it and made it his and made him more unique in IMDb.
And that's why they changed it from an H to a J, because of that theft.
Yes.
So it used to be Navajo and now it's Navajo. It's a whole letter theft.
Those are two current situations that film and television that you're talking about, David Kelly and Tom Hanks, that...
Dude, man, I'm sorry. I'm still wrestling with the E thing. You got me on that.
Did you want to riff on that longer? What else did you do?
No, I'm good. It just, you threw me, man. I was on like a thing. And all of a sudden,
I'm sorry. I interrupted you with that, didn't I?
No, not at all. That was kind of like when I was coming home from work and I was thinking all about doing my job. And then all of a sudden Naked Pete was telling me to get on my knees. And I was like,
I'm sorry.
Okay, yes, I'm with you. I'm going with you.
I see the opportunity. I take it. I'm not listening.
But that's what I'm saying is like, Tom Hanks and David Kelly are just like, F you. We don't have to deal with it. And when you have that happen, even if it's not direct, that has impact on our tribal youth. They're like, we don't matter. We can't say anything about what we're going through and have it have any resonance whatsoever. So for our university, and again, I don't want to badmouth our university because it's a very complex problem, but last year, when it was 18 students out of 4,000 that came in, that's a crisis. When it's 3 out of 4,000 or whatever the incoming class numbers would be, that's shameful. That's just embarrassing, man. And those numbers speak not only to what's going on, but when those numbers come out, they actually say something to the tribal youth. And especially if the university doesn't sound the alarm and say, we need to deal with this. And so when you look at how Native America is participating in mainstream media and they're erased from Tom Hanks's, Mr. Nice Guy and everything else, and David Kelly is just like, whatever, we're not going to deal with this. That speaks to our tribal youth in their place. And so, you're doing more damage to those relationships. And quite honestly, like Dan Snyder, we don't care because we don't have to care. And they get that.
Is there any way to diagnose what is happening with Native communities, tribal communities in this country, and be, is there any way to diagnose it and be specific? Because I'm sure there are just so many different catalysts and causes, but it would seem generations of racism and poverty and addiction and exploitation will take their toll on any any ethnicity, any community, and you get to a point where there's so little hope and opportunity and such limited resources that it becomes a cycle of poverty and of addiction and violence that it's just so hard to break. And the idea that people want to blame it on anything from personal responsibility to a lack of it's so hard to pin the blame on any one thing, which makes it very hard to I think solve it. Am I making it too complex?
No, not at all. I think these are all the questions, and I don't think that asking complex questions, because I think the problem is that we go and we want to have simple answers. So, as a scholar of race, gender, and media, I've been on different panel discussions, not only over this past year with COVID and everything else and stuff like that, but also with Black Lives Matter. And one of the people that, during the Q&A session, they said, can you give me some tips and tricks on how to solve racism in my life? And I'm like, and there was one person that was an expert that was just like, yeah, let me give you 3 things. And I'm like, are you serious? Tips and tricks, like trying to solve like a computer problem, like a computer hack. That's how we're going to fix racism in our society. Yeah. Here you go. Let me hook you up with 3 things, and then reboot the system, and we're good to go. No tips and tricks. Are you serious? But I think that that's what we tend to think about when we think about how we fix racism, systemic racism in our society. What are the tips and tricks so that we can move beyond this? It's like, there's no tips and tricks.
Well, tips and tricks might be a well-intentioned question about how I might, I myself might be better. But I think the answer generally, the tips and tricks answer is listen. You need to listen for a long time about all these issues, and then we can talk about the quote tricks to solve them. But they would have to be policies, I would imagine, and they would have to be wide.
I think that the 3 things that kind of come to mind when I've been doing the research that I've kind of been looking into and stuff is, the first one is rebuilding trust. And that seems kind of like flowery and everything else and stuff like that. But if you don't even have a conversation with anybody, if you're on giving each other the silent treatment, you got some deep issues. And I'm just talking about, one-on-one, interpersonal, family, or, friends, colleagues. If you're not talking, if you're not on speaking terms, or if you're just cordial about it, that's not a trusting relationship. And so how do you rebuild the trust between our institutions and our governments and our tribal communities? And pretending like there's not a problem doesn't solve it, man. Like you said. And I think one of the things that often happens is that we don't go out to our tribal communities and sit down with them. We invite them to come off of the reservations and say, no, come to our, in the case of that studio, come to our smoked glass high rise and let us do that. Or me going to New York City, moving away from my home and then having this white dude say, you should play Chief Bromden. That doesn't build trust, man. Come out there and sit down. Because one of the things I was like, if that executive at that studio went out to a tribal council meeting and said that to one of the tribal council members, or said that to me, his ass would not be getting out of that tribal council meeting clean. But here I am trying to help his studio understand how to do a better job, and he can run his mouth like that. Yeah. And in my mind, I'm like, listen, bitch, your ass needs to come out to sit in a tribal council meeting, or more than that, let me introduce you to some of the gang members out here who, have really given up, and let you run your mouth like that again. And, I was like, bruh,
you can have your E back. Just leave me alone. Let me back in my car.
And I'm like, bruh. So I think that's the thing, is like, how do you rebuild trust? And rebuilding trust is going to be a difficult thing. The other thing that we have to move beyond, so there's 3 things, is the kind of forced internalized colonization. So we have to kind of realize that when we are inviting Native America to come off of the reservations, it's the same set of dynamics that they did when there was forced cultural assimilation with the boarding schools, with Carlisle, right? Come off this reservation, look upon yourself as being primitive, broken, in need of our help. Look upon your communities as being broken, and turn your back on that, forever. And this is actually when we did our research on why, because we asked these questions. Why is Native America not coming to our school? The number one reason was no family support. And it sounds like, oh, well, that's jealousy and animosity. And some of that is there. But more than anything else, it's the family saying, when you leave, they're going to change you and they're going to make you hate yourself. They're going to make you hate us, and they're going to take you away forever. So sending you off to college isn't, well, we'll see you at the end of the semester. Sending you off to college becomes, we'll never see you again. In the same way, when the boarding schools would go out to the reservations or to the lands and everything else and snatch the Apache, snatch the Lakota, snatch the Cherokee and drag them forcefully off. It's the same type of mental dynamic. It's internalized colonization. And that is still held as the gold standard. Individualism, narcissism, capitalism, all these things that are really causing a lot of dysfunction in our society right now are the things that when they're asked to go off to college, they're asked to embrace. And so it's just like, no. And the last thing is there's absolutely no role models. So if our school doesn't have Native American staff, Native American professors, I'm one of two at our university. And this is across the country. Then kids come in and literally, and I had a couple of kids, tell me just the other day, we don't know what the difference between an advisor, an academic advisor, and an academic counselor. And I was like, that's a great question. And so because they don't know, they don't even start to ask because they think that that's a foolish question to have to ask. So they'd rather be like, I'm out, see ya, than actually show that they don't know how to navigate through this world. And so they need people that can be there to help them walk through these things. So those three things, there's no trust. How do we rebuild trust? And you got to have conversations. You got to go out there and you got to make real investments and doing, and I agree, listening starts it. But unfortunately, I think that a lot of what we've gotten into in the kind of like, diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of talk is listening tours, which do nothing. I'm like, enough with the listening tours, enough with the conferences, enough with the panel discussions. We need, like you were saying, policies. We need things in place that are actually going to be pragmatic, that have real results, and be willing to look at it. Like, I think that one of the nice things about student enrollment is we can measure it. We can see if we're doing better. We had 3. You can't get much worse, guys. If you have 2, 1, or 0, you're going the wrong way.
It feels like there's within the gender equity movement, Black Lives Matter, and just, women's empowerment movement. I guess that's gender equity too. I was thinking of, it seems like those groups of people have also kind of said, we're not doing any more listening tours. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to listen to us, because we don't need to sit here and have you visit us and have us tell you all the problems. We know what the problems are. We know what they are, and we know how to fix them. This is what we need. And they've kind of taken this power and this initiative. I'm thinking of people like Stacey Abrams. I'm thinking of people, in the environmental movement, as well as the kind of modern day movement in feminism, which there are numerous leaders in many ways. But we haven't seen that in the tribal communities in this country. We haven't gotten to a point where you can take the initiative and say, no more listening tours. This is what needs to happen. We need, as you ticked off those 3 things. It would seem that, and I have no idea what I'm talking about, but it would seem like the women's movement, black movement, if you will, black liberation movement, have taken a lot more power and been able to, for any number of reasons we could discuss. Do you think there's any truth to that the tribal community is yet to get that kind of power and influence?
Right. And I think that this comes down to the idea of, and it's complicated and, kind of boil it down to some key issues, I think, is, again, this idea of internalized colonization, right? Which is the idea, are we talking about individual elevation? Or are we talking about community elevation? Are we talking about going out there and Stacey Abramsing this so that I have a good social media following, so that I can monetize that, so that I become rich and famous, Well,
you don't take away. Stacey Abrams has a movement of voter, registration more than anything else.
Right. And I think that that's the thing is like, and I, kind of, I don't mean to throw Stacey. I think she's done some really good work, but I do think that there are these questions about who is this really helping? Really helping? Who is actually the beneficiary of these efforts? And I think that we have gotten into a place now where, with social media, this idea of prestige and clout being just about the self. And I think that there are a lot of, again, self-identified Native Americans out there who are pushing these kinds of like social media strategies that are truly about elevating the self, and they're not really about the community, and again, going back to being an athlete and stuff, is one of my coaches, a basketball coach, said, it's amazing what can be accomplished when nobody cares who gets the credit. And I think that that's one of the things about this idea, which is we need to do this for the good of everything. However, our society is still based around and continues to be based around the individual becoming kind of like a spokesperson. So it's a strange quandary that we have to like try to like tap into and kind of come to, do we really need to have the Kardashians tell people to get to wear masks, to get the vaccine in order for that to gain traction? And we had the Surgeon General who said, hey, Kardashians, please help us out, get the word out that people need to be wearing masks and need to be doing this. And so there's an acknowledgement that says, yeah, you kind of need that narcissist out there leading the charge. But I think that a lot of the Native Americans that I know, the people who raised me, my mom, my aunts, my grandma, they were like, no, you do not put yourself first. And that was like a deep, deep lesson. And so I do think that that's one of those kind of like cultural ways of being that oftentimes gets minimized. People laugh at that. They're like, oh yeah, you're about helping the people. And even right now, I know that when I go out and I'm trying to like push projects forward and everything else and stuff, they're like, what do you want out of it, Myrt? What are you getting out of this? I was like, no, I'm trying to actually help our Native American youth and trying to create, better representations of Native America so that we can actually fix some of these problems that are happening in our tribal communities. And they're like, whatever, dude, you're just trying to be on TV. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Well,
and actually, that happened with a film that I was in called Skins. It's just a strange title. But the director of that movie, when we were like doing the voiceover, kind of going back and doing the looping and everything else and stuff, I was at USC at the time, the University of Southern California Film School. And I said, hey man, USC organizes film screenings of movies that are coming out in order to help them kind of like, get a critical following, get, some momentum going and everything else. And if you want, I can talk to my instructors. I can talk to USC, the film school, and maybe we can organize one of these film screenings for you and this film, Skins. And he was like, he looked at me and he's Native American. He's a Native American dude. And he was just like, oh, it's all about you, huh, Myrt? I was like, whoa, what? He was like, so it all has to help you out. Like, you're not really trying. And the sentiment that he was saying was, you're not really trying to help me out. You're not trying to help out the film. This is just Myrt's just trying to put himself out in front. I was like, where did this come from, man? I didn't say anything. I was just like kind of blown away by the whole thing. I was like, dude, you're the director and this is your film. I'll stand in the background. I'm just trying to get, Native American production out there, and I'm at USC. I can like help organize this. But he was like, oh, it's all about you, huh? And I was just like, done. And that was the last time I brought that up. And we never screened it at USC. It never, and the movie was, didn't do that well. It kind of tanked actually. But that I've bumped into that happen a few times, where people are like, you're not really trying to help out Native American, Myrt. And I'm like, okay. Well, because, the way that we think about not only media production, but also kind of the narcissism that surrounds it.
Well, it's probably also common in marginalized communities.
Yeah.
And that you're out for yourself, not the community. And then I'm just speaking, ignorantly, I almost can't blame people from marginalized communities to try to be out for themselves, because helping the community is way less likely than helping yourself to get to a better place. So, I'm sure there's a lot of scholarly research on that, how people from marginalized communities tend to try to look out for themselves other than the community that they come from, because they're just trying to get out of the constant pain and subjugation. But I have no idea what I'm talking about, but I can see where.
Not at all, because I think that's one of the that kind of like, tightrope act that somebody like Stacey Abrams has to walk, right? It's just like, in order for me to gain access to be able to have this platform that I'm going to get the word out, I have to have a certain amount of notoriety. But when you start to gain that so that people listen to you, then all of a sudden your community is just like, oh, you're just out for yourself.
Right.
And so it becomes really, really difficult to do this. And so you need somebody like Stacey Abrams who keeps their eye and their focus on the ball.
Yeah.
And you really have to be careful of people that are like, hucksters and manipulators.
It's crazy. It doesn't seem like it's like with tribal people, with native people, it's like there really aren't a lot of role models out there. And they tend to be more likely in the arts, which is fine and great, but there should be people in other industries as well. And I wonder how much you paid attention to and how significant you think it is that a congresswoman from, I think, New Mexico, who's Native American, Deb Norland, has been appointed to be the Secretary of the Interior. When I heard her speech, I got emotional knowing what I know about the federal government, their responsibilities, Interior, which basically oversees all of the land. I mean, the symbolism of a Native woman being in charge of all of America's land. I mean, that's obviously still has to deal with Congress and the president, her boss. But to me, that I want to believe that you think that that's a good thing.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think that, first of all, just the visibility in that role model, like we were talking about, we need that in place. The idea also, you talked about the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the BIA, but also things like IHS, right? Indian Health Services. And so things like COVID, which just runs rampant through a lot of tribal communities and everything else. And with the Navajo, I think that they had 3 respirators for 17,000 people. So, yeah, we need more visibility to these issues. And I think that having somebody like this, the new Secretary of the Interior, helps with that. It's really, really difficult to navigate those waters, though, man. Yeah. Politics, it's just all that stuff comes up, and everybody has their hand out.
Well, especially that's literal and Interior, difficult to navigate those waters, because water is actually a huge issue when it comes to the Department of the Interior, and it's a commodity, unfortunately.
Well, I think that, and one of these issues that comes up is, how much are we making investments? How much are we making support for Native Americans to be more self-sufficient? Well, in one
of your shorts, Resball, you use this John Stossel clip. John Stossel is this libertarian asshole, in my opinion, who basically, who you use the audio of it, him saying, how much more do these people need? They're given everything and food and shelter and assistance of all sorts. At what point will they take personal responsibility? Is kind of the gist. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but you use that quote and you actually use that audio in that short that you directed, and I wonder why.
Yeah. I think that, and a lot of people were upset also with not the last film that we did that is kind of like making its rounds through the film festivals and everything else right now. But the one I did before is called Soldier, and it was about 2 sisters during that were refugees during the Wounded Knee massacre. And that opens up with Trump's kind of like interview on Fox. And he says, well, America's done a lot of bad things as well. The leaders and the presidents, I'm paraphrasing again, have done some really atrocious things. And I just cut it off there. And a lot of people were like, are you promoting Trump? And a lot of people were like, are you promoting, John Stossel? No, as a matter of fact, I think that we need to, and I don't know if this is, because of my training as a critic or a scholar, but I thought about these things when I was an artist as well. I was just like, wait a second, this is a lot more complicated. And so for somebody, John Stossel or for Trump to get on there and just kind of blather off at the mouth about things that they're completely uninformed about, but take these really hard line stances, knowing that they have the platform, we have to question that. Like, no, it's not that easy. They get free burials and they get free education. No, they don't. No, they don't. No, we don't. I owe well over $200,000 for my education. And most Native Americans that I know don't get free education. We don't get free burials. When my mom died, I paid for everything. And so, he wants to make these kind of like grandiose statements and everything else and stuff to rile up his audience. And it's just not true. But even beyond that, even with these programs that are, you also have to look at, the historic kind of like roots of what's going on, where, for generations, Native Americans that, following basically the American Indian Wars, they were put on land tracts and forced to stay on these things. And they were nomadic people. Most of them were nomadic people forced to take up agriculture, the arts of civilization, and the different acts of Congress said. Taking up the arts of civilization, which included agriculture. Well, they didn't fucking know. And then beyond that, if they actually did start to make that land profitable, then frontiersmen, colonial people would come in and take that land away from them. They're like, oh, well, this is valuable. Or if there were minerals or if there was oil, oh, go on that pile of rocks.
Well,
over there.
Well, let me just close on that and ask you about that, because the idea that if a tribe, if their entire existence has always been for generations to be nomads, to travel, to follow the resources, the animals, the seasons, whatever it might be. I think people know what the word nomad means. And you say, stop doing that and be like us. That seems to be the problem with colonization in the history of human civilization. We know better than you do. We've got all of this technology, advanced cultures. We're enlightened. Be like us, you savages. And when in fact, it's interesting, because when you look at the issue of our time, of all human time, it's climate crisis. And certainly tribal people understood and practice a kind of sustainability that is where we need to be. And we will, I'm sure, never get back to that. But we took sustainability from them, and we have just created landfills around the world as a result of plastic and wherever you want to start, natural resources of all kinds, burning fossil fuels. This was against the culture, the religion, what have you, of native peoples around the world. We took it from them. We tried to make them all, productive capitalists and stay in this one place and grow this crop. And by the way, as you just said, and when the crop becomes abundant, we'll fucking take it from you. And that has been the history of native people, not only in America, but around the world. I think it's fair to say. Exactly. And it's so obvious what went wrong and what we need to get back to. And I guess I'm coming to the end of my diatribe without a question.
No. Because I think that the rhetoric kind of goes along the lines of like, and by the way, you'll be better off if you emulate this.
Yes.
We're going to not only take your land and everything else and push forth, individualism, narcissism, and capitalism as the right way of being. Now we want you to do that as well. We want you to do this. And so this comes down to this really important kind of distinction between white supremacy, right? So we have that kind of like ideology of like, it was divined by God that, you had manifest destiny that said the white man's going to come in and it's God's will that he takes over this land from sea to shining sea. It's God's will. That's different than white superiority, which is this kind of like weird kind of like so-called intellectual kind of like way of going about it. It's like, no, wait a second. We this is thoughtful. We've thought about, what cultural systems are the best, what economic systems, what political systems are the best. And when you look at this, it's obvious that white culture is the superior one when you look at it and you pull it apart. And that then again kind of reinforces this idea of like, so let us teach you this science, politics, economics. It all points to the white cultural way of doing things. And we're going to indoctrinate you to this. And so all of a sudden you have this weird kind of like, okay, you have zombies almost that are just like, you're right. We need to be more individual.
It's not hard to convince people of your cultural superiority. Look, don't you want TV? Don't you want this? And it's not hard to convince people that to want that, because there's a lot that you could. And it's like when I think about it now, it's the juxtaposition between when we were driving home last night, my daughter and her friend skiing, and I was like, look at this full moon with the clouds in front of it. And my daughter's like, would you stop talking about the moon? I'm making a TikTok. Like,
right, yeah.
That's
and at the same time, you're also in a car that allows you to actually do,
and we just went skiing with man-made snow. Yeah, no, all of it. It's
you're not in public transportation on your way up to the mountain, and I don't know even how that would be, but
I would never subject my family to a bus. Obviously, we're well-to-do whites.
Right. Exactly. We would never do that thing that we see people in the continent of India or in South America, where you see entire families taking, trains and public transport. How dare you? We're American. Don't you want your own, carbon emission, like gas guzzling, machine to get out there so that you have your freedom? Yeah. These are the things that become all of a sudden in a certain way obvious, it's just like, well, obviously this is a superior culture. What? And this becomes kind of part of the disconnect or the erosion of the trust between indigenous cultures, Native American cultures, and our institutes of higher education. And again, the family's saying, don't go off to college because they're going to change the way that you think in terms of like valuing others, valuing family, valuing where you come from and your connection to these lands. And they're going to tell you that your land is a commodity to be chopped up into little pieces and sold off to the highest bidder. And that becomes kind of like a way that, the graduates then do. And we saw this, all the way back to the Carlisle Indian School in 1879, where those students who were being indoctrinated wrote letters back home and they said, you need to give up the Indian way. You need to understand that Christianity, that, these political systems, this is the better way. And they used broken language, but there was no place for American Indian culture to hide once the boarding school systems came into being, because now it wasn't just the attack from the outside by non-native people, by white people. It was the converted mindset of their children coming back home and saying, no, mom, no, dad, you need to change this forever and for good. And that's going to be and so this idea of cultural superiority is one of those things that we have to kind of like reconcile, because it's like, wait a second, if we're going to change this, we have to look at our values as a nation, and unless we're willing to do that. And right now, you can go on, YouTube and social media, and you can see people who are just like, F you, we're going to get in our big ass trucks and we're going to prime the carburetor to where it just billows out.
Yeah, I want to fight. Smoke. I want to fight them. Those are the people I would fight physically to the death. Anybody it's called rolling coal. You ever heard that? There is in fact a mechanism that you put in, I don't know, carburetor or whatever it is. That, and if you can have a smokestack on your pickup or whatever, usually it's a pickup or a big truck, and it pumps out black smoke, and that's called rolling coal, and it's done just to elicit pain. Right. That's it. Elicit pain. And I feel the same way about fireworks, and inflatable lawn ornaments.
Imagine if that was like a hood car and you did that in like on the res or in the ghetto or in the hood. Those people would be arrested and put in jail for months. They'd be like, you can't do that, but put it on YouTube and, put it out in like the Appalachians and everything else. I'm being totally stereotypical right now. But that's like celebrated and you get like tons of like likes on it.
Yeah. Because waste and consumption is not virtue.
American way.
Yeah. All right, we'll end it there, and we'll pick it up very soon. And I'd love, I'd love for you to join my, one of our hangouts and just take questions from people, because I honestly, think most people. Do you think most people have not had a direct conversation with a full blood Native American? Most people haven't.
Yeah, and there's a weird tension, not only from my stature and everything else and stuff like that, but I think that also, there's a weird kind of like tension, because at first it's nice and polite and everything else and stuff. And then we kind of get into some issues, and then all of a sudden it breaks into defensiveness and anger. And, and I think that we need to go there. Like, that's one of the things I tell my colleagues is that when you go out to the reservations, if and when you go out to the reservations and you sit down, there's going to be a time where you think, oh, things are cool. We're in progress. And if you hang there long enough, you are going to get cussed out, and there's going to be a lot of pain, a lot of anger, and a lot of hurt that you're going to have to sit through, and you have to take it. You got to take your talking to, man. And then we can start getting into solutions. That's typically what happens when I sit down and I talk with folks about.
Well, I hate to make you a token, but I don't know another way to do it. I mean, it is what it is.
Token the shit out of me. Sorry. I keep cussing.
Did you beat me up, or at least put me in, like, I feel like you would put me in a hold of some sort. What?
Yeah. I didn't beat you up. I never beat you up. I lifted your dad up. I remember that kind of.
I recall you physically lifting my father up, and it was a great joy to me to see. But no, I feel like you did. If like you could put me, you never would strike me, but I do feel like you would put me into a position where I would have to submit. Yes.
Yeah,
that was.
I worked for a place where, you remember those, and they had those boot camps where they would take like really violent teenagers who had broken the law and stuff, and they'd bring them out into the desert or these different remote places, and they would like make them exercise for recuperation. I worked at one of those places, and that was some stuff that they taught us how to do.
Yeah. And then I did it on you. You applied it to me more than once, to the point where I would run from you. Like he's gonna put me into a submission hold because I ate one of his hot dogs.
Sweet nothings to you, and you wouldn't.
You did. You were gentle about it, but I knew I did feel unsafe, and it would usually they would be like, "Did you eat one of my hot dogs?" I'm like, I might have.
Or ask you to get more naked. Hey, man. How about more nakedness?
And
you'd be like, let me go.
You
let
never
me go.
requested more nakedness from me because it never needed to be requested because it was generally naked. Myrton Running Wolf, part 1.
Condition.
It's in the tank.
Man.
Thank you, pal.
It's so great.
Love you, man. Great to see you.
Love you too.
Myrton Running Wolf, Dr. Myrton Running Wolf. Look him up, watch all of his work, support him, and thank you very much for supporting me. All of you who are paid subscribers, I hope to see you at the New Year's Eve party. That's 10 o'clock, Thursday the 31st, right? And I look forward to seeing you there. Hang out with me. Also, the Discord platform is always available for you 24/7 to join in and hang out in there, see what everybody's up to, make new friends, network, talk. And I hope you're having a good Taint Week. I appreciate your support. Know that you're not alone. I love you, and thank you so much for listening to today's show. Go ahead and write a review, especially if you listen on Apple Podcasts. That's a big thing. If you've never written a review, do that now. Click on the paid subscription link if you are not already a subscriber, and I would love to have you sign up tomorrow night. I'll read all the new subscribers' names and give shout-outs. That's always a lot of fun to do. I'll do that on tomorrow's podcast. And thank you very much for listening to today's. I love learning and growing along with you each and every day here on Stand Up. Bye-bye.
Boy, you better stand up, stand up. When you're tired of begging, saying pretty please, that's the time you gotta finally get up off of your knees. When you can't see the forest for the burning trees, you got to stand